Hello and welcome to Walk in Three Worlds. It's been a while, and the great thing about this episode is that we're going to introduce Uncle Charles, who's also starting his first podcast, and we'll hear more about that in a moment. But I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, particularly the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and all the elders past and present. And we acknowledge and respect all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of this land and all the people that come together on this land and share that with them. And Uncle Charles Passi, how are you? We finally get in the studio.
Yeah. We definitely do need to have a yarn. I think there's so much that out there that this country needs, just a yarn.
Exactly.
There's so many questions. There's so many things that need to be spoken about that are not being spoken about. So thanks, Greg, for this opportunity to have this yarn. And I'm looking forward to not only what because it's a real chance for me to get what's off my chest too.
Look, this is the beauty for those of you who've not looked at Uncle Charles Passi's history. I'm going to give you a little snapshot of that. We'll also put the bigger version up on the new Facebook page that'll be set up, and then the website. And obviously you can find all these details on my website at walkin3worlds.com with a number 3, that is walkin3worlds.com. We're here at the new JMC Academy studios too, and we're going to thank them at the end of this because they've been just fabulous to let Uncle Charles and I come together here. We'd been talking about having a conversation that we want to be very logical and rational. There's a lot of stuff that's been fired up, particularly I know a lot of my friends and family don't even understand what this voice to Parliament is about, but this is not why we're here. We're here to do a whole lot of work, and you have a listen to a lot of the wisdom that this beautiful Torres Strait Islander man holds. It's very rare for someone to be able to hear the depth of his knowledge, and I've had the pleasure of hearing some of that in our preamble before we've come here. But for those of you who don't know, Charles Passi was born into the traditional responsibility of land ownership and preservation of cultural traditions in both Mer and Erub Islands. Did I say that right?
Erub.
In the Torres Strait. So this gentleman is a true Torres Strait Islander through and through. He draws his interpretations from his very deep cultural connections, and through his birthright as a proud Meriam and the eldest son of Dave and Lena Passi. He believes that sharing his culture of communal sharing of responsibility and respect will help heal the dysfunctions in our world, as its earthly philosophies are based on ensuring positive relationships between ourselves and with all our environment. He embraces the challenge to influence and participate in leading Aboriginal affairs in the country to new and profound heights of positive connection and representation. Some of his past involvements have been a former member of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Group to the Domestic and Family Violence Implementation Council. He was the former chair of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Healing Foundation, which was based in Canberra, still exists. And Charles believes in his abilities as a visionary, and with his experience and insight has committed himself to the redevelopment of current practices in providing real and sustainable positive solutions to the issues plaguing our people and our culture and our communities. He's also very active in many different organisations and universities as well. His father, the late David Passi, was also one of the successful litigants in the Mabo and others High Court case in 1992. So he brings deep insight into the native title. He brings deep insight in around the healing and unification of the First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, with now other people that obviously live on this land and share this space. We're going to unpack a lot. I also mentioned that we're starting, this is the very first podcast for Uncle Charles himself. And so I'm honoured to have him on my sort of rebirth of Walking Three Worlds. His podcast is called The Message with Uncle Charles Passi. And with this, he is the messenger of some really deep insights that you're not going to hear, and bring the discussion back into the sacred ways that Torres Strait Islander people and First Nations Aboriginal people, both the Indigenous mobs, want to share their history. So, Uncle Charles, I think without further ado, I'd like to open the floor for you to bring forward whatever is most on your mind that you'd like to start this first episode of The Message.
Thank you, Greg. First of all, as the son of Dave Passi, one of the plaintiffs of the Mabo and others' decision, I want to pay my respects, but pay my respects in a way where I'm actually an alien walking on this country. I came here without proper cultural permission. The traditional custodians weren't given that opportunity to give me that proper welcome to walk on this country and live here and prosper in this land. So I want to acknowledge that, and hopefully we can move Southeast Queensland to a point where that can be truly done and given the honour to the traditional custodians, the right to welcome properly, welcome visitors to this country, especially for not only myself, but also Torres Strait Islanders, that we're also recognised as Indigenous people to this country also. But to this region, we're aliens, just like everyone else that's not from here. So I want to acknowledge the great creator that has given the traditional custodians the right to look after this space many, many, many thousands of years ago. And in their care, they've kept this country beautiful and prosperous and powerful to a point where we're now today benefiting from it. So I give my honour and respect and promise that while I'm on this country, I'll do my utmost to respect it and make sure that it's looked after, and I do whatever I can to assist in being a part of the magic of healing country. So that's what I want to look at, not only for Southeast Queensland, but for Torres Strait, for Queensland, and for this whole country. I think we're in a space where everything's in the palm of our hands in terms of Aboriginal affairs. We've been given so much more opportunities to have people sitting in the highest forms of leadership in the country. We've got our own Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander politicians. We've got high-profile Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people in government sector, in the corporate sector, in quite high places. So we're in a place like never before. The thing for me, though, and I think we're struggling to get it right, is how we get our people working in a space that we get the benefit out of those opportunities.
Just for our listeners, a lot of people hear Torres Strait Islanders and they don't necessarily know what that means or where Torres Strait Islanders come from and how did they get wrapped up into the bundle of the second sort of group of Indigenous people. So do you want to give a little bit of a sort of a snapshot of Torres Strait Islanders, how many islands that represents and where it's actually positioned if you were looking at a map of Australia?
Well, basically, Torres Strait is the strait, the gap between the tip of Queensland and the coast of Papua New Guinea. So that's the Torres Strait, as opposed to on the other side of the country, you've got the Bass Strait between the mainland of Australia and Tasmania.
My homeland, and I was thinking about this, just you come from the islands on the north, I come from the furthest island on the south as a sixth-generation convict descendant, placed there. And here part of this conversation is about seeing ourselves as potentially coming from these different islands onto the mainland, as you rightly point out, really sort of now bringing together our deeper understanding of mainland Aboriginal people, and the fact, as you mentioned, not having permission initially when you came here, and I'm equally, my ancestors didn't either, that whole colonisation that sort of rolled out, and my family were all part of being dragged out here as she was a convict at a young age in Tasmania. So yeah, Bass Strait, Van Diemen's Land, which had a name change in 1850, and Torres Strait up there with many islands. How many islands up there?
Oh, there's quite a lot of islands in there. I think there's probably 18, I think, communities that are islands that are inhabited.
Where did it get its name? The Torres, was that, who came there?
Oh, that's, yeah.
It wasn't the British though, was it?
No.
No. Was it the French?
No, it's a Spaniard. Louis Vaz de Torres. They went through there in the 1600s.
That's right. Like the Dutch were here in 1606.
Yeah, so that was a long time ago.
See, we could have ended up having the Spanish take over the continent if they knew it was existing. Did they take over? Did they dominate any part of Torres Strait at the time?
No, I don't think so.
No.
They just went through there, so they recorded what's the name?
Yeah.
But anyway, the Torres Strait then is that region. Now, we as Torres Strait Islanders, we are part of the Melanesian people. So there's a distinct line between us and the Aboriginal people of this mainland. But because the international border runs right up on the top part, probably only a couple of kilometres off the coast of Papua New Guinea. So our most northernest point in the nation in Australia would be Boigu Island, Boigu. So that's right up next to the coast of Papua New Guinea. So the whole of the Torres Strait then is taken in, and because we're part of the Australian nation, we then become part of the indigenous people that were here before colonisation. So as Torres Strait Islanders alongside the Aboriginal people. But one thing I'd like to say is that a long time ago, the Melanesian people understood that this country was occupied by the Aboriginal people since time immemorial, for quite a long time. So there was that respect. So we stayed within our boundaries. But what happened is that there's a network of relationships that, of course, is right across this country and this continent here. But that network extends across the Torres Strait, across all the different islands, and into Papua New Guinea, and I'm sure right into Tasmania. So that network in our songlines held a lot of power in support and respect, and how we walk on people's country, how we have that relationship between each other, and through that relationship we could trade, and we could keep in peace. We didn't have to fear one another because of that respect. Now that's something that has kept the whole region, this whole country, vibing and surviving for many, many thousands of years. So in that history, that knowledge, that spirit are the answers for how we can survive as a nation of people respecting each other. Now that's something that today this country needs to become better at. How, this is deeper than what reconciliation can do, what it's supposed to do.
And we'll unpack that at a later stage, yeah.
Yeah. Even when we're looking at, for example, closing the gap.
Another good topic for you.
Another thing that
both of us, yeah.
See, these are the things that are like the voice, even the Mabo decision, the
Statement
apology,
of the heart.
Statement of the heart.
Yep.
All those things are part of the history of
Bringing them home report.
They're all part of the political agenda.
Yeah.
When we're looking at how the advancement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But in that history, we've fumbled along the way. Now, we can say that a lot of the blame is to do with government, with those in positions of power,
and the institutions, wasn't it?
The institutions, but it's there's always someone at the head that says, okay, well, we're going to follow this pathway.
Yep.
Now we can blame that head and say, like, okay, it could be the Prime Minister of the country, it could be our premiers, it could be, because they're seen as the head of our leadership.
When you unpack that and you read Thomas Keneally's book around the Commonwealth and its formation, when Governor Phillip came here with the first fleet, with 1,400 convicts, he was instructed to build a relationship with the, as they called it, the natives. They knew there were people on this land, that was known and cited and had some interaction with Cook's exploration, which was, 1770. So you're talking 8 years later when they came here, after they'd been booted out of North America, setting up their penal colonies. Governor Phillip, my understanding of reading some of the history is that he was given that you must build a deeper understanding. They'd gone through different islands, I believe, out in the Pacific, and they had a particular idea that, darker-skinned people would act this particular way, or they thought they would just all be able to speak to each other. I think they brought a Maori leader, a chief over at the time, to try to interpret, and there was no bridge for those languages to be shared. They hadn't actually understood each other. And Governor Phillip was the one responsible, but of course he had military and other people in power within his settlement, on the first fleet, 11 ships, that didn't have the same idea. They just wanted to start to, tease and agitate the First Nations people on the land. And that's why he got speared, remember, a year or two later in that journey he was here. And then, of course, the next governor came in and he had a very different idea about what should happen. And you're right, it's the people at the top, in charge of those institutions that misread the situation. And then, fast forward to 2008, Kevin Rudd stands up and apologises on behalf of the government on all the injustices that occurred and all the dispossession and all the, pressure to lose culture and lose language. And I think here we are at a very interesting stage where a lot of the younger people are starting to explore their culture
the thing
again now, aren't they?
The thing for me, Greg, is that, this is where it's a dangerous point. History is there. You can't change it. But it's what we interpret from it and how we look at that history and where we go from here. Because history can say, okay, because of this, you need to follow this pathway. But we could look at it and say, okay, and be angry because of that past, and then keep the pain going by causing this country to pay, and we need to hold this country to account. Or we can walk another way and say, okay, that history has happened, but they were misguided. So what we need to do now is heal the pain of the past and begin a whole new way forward.
And recognise it.
Well, we recognise it.
Yeah.
But if we live there,
Yep.
then it's hard to move forward.
It's like a victim stuck in a,
Well, that's it.
in a like, what's that? Like a mud pool that just wants to suck you back in, and you can never rise out of that because you just keep.
And that's what we're stuck in. That's what we're stuck in. That's what I fear.
Yes.
Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Australia are stuck in. And the more we keep going, and I say this respectfully in a way that says that, for example, I had the opportunity of sitting around the table of the Healing Foundation that came out of the apology. Now, that apology, it took the, respectfully, the madness of Kevin Rudd, if I can put it that way. He had the courage, even against his predecessor, John Howard, said, no, I am not going to apologise because the voters of this country don't want to go down that road. But Kevin Rudd said, no, I'm going to do it anyway.
And it's interesting.
And when he did, the dynamics, the shift, because as an Indigenous person, you never thought something like that could happen in our lifetime. I remember that moment.
A lot of emotion that was bottled up, wasn't it? That came out. Yeah.
And,
I'm getting goosebumps even just thinking about that moment.
On TV, nearly every channel was had the apology. So everyone, I was at Bachelor Institute at that time. The whole institute stood still. You can hear people crying with that incredible emotion of, wow, it felt a place of pride to be an Indigenous person, because finally this country is moving to a place that we can walk some kind of freedom. So out of that came the Healing Foundation. Now, me personally, what I wanted to see is that there became an opportunity. Okay, where do we walk from here? There's a deep history because the apology came out from the stolen generations. Now, the stolen generations is such a nasty part of our history that we need to put in the past.
And that's like 4 or 5 generations of people stolen from their families and taken down to, in Queensland, Baramba, which is now Cherbourg, that was the mission. And all over the country, they put people and dragged them away or walked them away from their mob and tried to just bring them all together. You ended up with something like 100 different nations in a place like Cherbourg, and I can imagine in Adelaide it was similar, and in South Australia as we know it, and Western Australia.
Well, there's a lot of that history.
Yeah.
But look, I'm trying to say, if we put a microscope on it, then we'll get stuck in it.
Yes, totally.
So it's how we move to a place, because all that history is there.
And interesting.
And if we're interested in it, you can go and have a look at it.
Oh, there's plenty of books about all of these things, and a lot I've got on the website for people if they're interested to know. But you only have to Google it, and you can go down. The stolen generation created the United Nations to build a thing called the Bring Them Home Report, and that became a video that you can watch for 40 minutes on YouTube for free. It's sitting there now, captured the stories from the people. So what was that, about 1997? With the apology, and yes, Kevin Rudd came in and said it, but all the churches have now, since then, all apologised too, because remember, it was this conglomeration of different institutions that were doing the trauma and creating that that sort of generational trauma that people were carrying. They came out, but there wasn't sort of the major television coverage. You can find it online. The Baptist Church apologised, the Catholic Church apologised, the Anglicans have apologised, and they're all from, them recognising that they too, or their predecessors had made bad choices, you know?
Yeah, but I think it's got to go. I don't know. This is where courageous and innovative leadership needs to step up. That's what this country is lacking. Is that courage to do, that courage to step forward and do what nobody else will do. And for me, Kevin Rudd gave that example by doing that. You know, people didn't like him. People didn't like him for what he did, but in terms of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, he became a hero because he had the courage to do so.
Yes, and it's interesting.
So what we need to do now, and from here, we need to learn from as a people into the future.
Yeah.
What's needed is courageous and innovative leadership. Now, I think for me, there's big confusion between what a manager does and what true leadership's about. You know, we're making managers become leaders, and when you're a manager, what you do is you look at risk. So you stop people from going ahead by trying to lead people to stay within the safe environment. What we need is a leadership to say, look, for us to break this mold and move forward, we got to go where we think it might be dangerous. But at the other side of crossing this dangerous river is freedom. So that's what we need to do. That's that courageous and innovative leadership. And one of them was Uncle Koiki, Eddie Mabo, and the plaintiffs. They got attacked by their own people, Torres Strait Islanders, and they fought for 10 years and a lonely journey. There's the brotherhood within the plaintiffs, you know, to stand strong. And after 10 years, they created something that the world is looking at. Indigenous people across the world is looking at, you know. So that should be a great model for all of us to look at. How do we move into a space that that says it's going to give us freedom, but it's not freedom from us fighting with the tools of the power of the Western world.
Not the weaponry.
Not that weaponry.
No.
And that's what we're trying to do by going into Parliament. We're trying to fight with their tools.
Which is politics. And I get the sense that a lot of the solutions that aren't getting sort of talked about in the broader scene, it's a spiritual sort of understanding, a deeper for us to heal. You know, it's even for, you know, the first settlers, you know, the convicts generation, or the new migrants that have come here and don't understand the history. We need to understand that First Nations people already had a very deep connection, and you can unpack this a little bit more, to their sense and place around land and country. That probably it has a different interpretation for people from Europe or Britain when they came, because they brought with them their food supply, which was their sheep and the cattle, which actually affected deeply a lot of the ecosystems that were already here, quite, you know, the living plants and animals that already existed were being shifted from this sort of import coming in from overseas. And where I'm going with this is the dreaming, all of the type of, I suppose the way that First Nations people held themselves together, and Torres Strait Islander people, in a spiritual way. So if we're going to heal this country, we need to have some understanding of that, how that connection, and you've talked to me about this prior to this conversation, around how if we heal, it has a sort of a symbiotic relationship with the land itself. Do you want to unpack that? Do you know where I'm going with that?
Well, see, this is the sad part of it all, is that like for us to move forward, I might sit at the table and say, okay, come on, Greg, now let's you know, if I'm willing to say, I'm not going to hold you to account anymore, I will sit at the table and we move forward. But if you're going to keep yourself to account and you're feeling guilty about what's happened in the past, then how can we move forward? See, in our conversations so far today, Greg, is that you've really tried to look at that history and that nasty history and if you keep thinking about that, then I can't walk forward with you. You see what I mean?
Yeah, beautiful. We get that.
So what I'd like to do is set a Wasanam, and that's the beauty of our cultural way. Is that and what I'm trying to teach at the moment is the philosophy of the island mat. And on that mat, we welcome people. Come, we sit down, we go eat, we share food together. And when you eat, you bring peace and happiness because you're sharing good food. And when you're sharing good food, then that sets a platform for us to start walking, because we can joke, we can laugh, we can, and then we move together forward. That's what I'd like for us to look at as a nation, how we move together. We've got to bury the ills of the past. We've got to stop the blame game. We've got to stop being victims, because how can we sit at some kind of treaty as a sovereign nation? We can't be sitting there as victims. It'll never happen. We can never move this country forward. So we've got to sit on that mat and share it as one people of this country.
Uncle Charles, I think that's a great place to end this first podcast. And I think
let's talk more in the next one.
Let's talk more and unpack that. I think that's great. So thank you, everyone. Don't forget that how to find us is walking3worlds.com with a number 3, and The Message. The Message will have its own website over the next few weeks. It will have also Facebook, of course, and all the social media platforms eventually. We just wanted to get this started so that The Message has a platform for Uncle Charles to bring in guests, to even have sometimes where he just reflects, and that he has an opportunity, and they can be short bursts, 15 minutes of his wisdom. I think this is a wonderful platform to get started, and I'm hoping you've enjoyed this, and we'd love to have some feedback. You can find Charles Passi online, but you'll also find The Message. We'll set that up this week.
Yeah.
And Walking Through Worlds, you can find me as well there. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this at home or on the car or wherever you are. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.